Greetings, students, and welcome to another edition of Mr. Zoller's Social Studies Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about King John and the Magna Carta. Now, in order to talk about King John and the Magna Carta, though, we need a little background. So we're actually going to go back in history, and we're going to remind ourselves a little bit about early English history when we had Edward the Confessor as kind of the first king to really unite all these disparate parts of England here together. Now, we know that in the end, though, Edward the Confessor dies, and then we have three different people who claim the throne. One is Harold of Wessex over here, and Harold of Wessex is kind of the inside man. He's got a connection to Edward the Confessor. Then we've got Harold of Norway over here, whose nickname was Harold the Bad, and then we've also got William of Normandy, who lives down here in France. Now, we know that Harold of Wessex is eventually crowned the king. Neither of our other two guys, though, find this to be particularly pleasing, and so they both mount an invasion. Harold of Norway comes first. He comes over, and he is eventually killed in battle. Blah, now he's dead. William of Normandy comes over as well. In the battle that follows, the Battle of Hastings, Harold of Wessex is killed in battle. He's actually shot in the eye with an arrow, and so William of Normandy takes over, and we know him as William the Conqueror. All right, flash forward in history. We know that William the Conqueror, he's really going to put together a unified England, a unified government, and then his son, Henry I, is going to add to this success. He's going to overhaul the finances, and he's going to create one system that's more efficient of bringing in money. He's also going to establish a circuit of judges who will be royal judges as opposed to our feudal lords who'd been deciding these things in the past. Now, that brings us to King Henry II. Henry II is going to continue the judicial overhauls. He's going to marry a French girl, and he's going to add more lands to English territory. He's also going to create a mercenary army so that the king doesn't have to rely as heavily on his feudal lords. Again, what we see overall throughout all three of these kings is a move to consolidate more and more power with a central authority, with a central king. That's going to change when we pull up our next monarch, who's King John down here. And King John, remember, is the one that we're going to connect to our story here about the Magna Carta. Now, in order to talk about that, though, we need to take a step back. And what I'd like to do is actually look at this big picture and think about how governments of the Middle Ages are going to compare to, say, our governments of today. So that's what we'll look at. Start with our governments of Middle Ages. That'll be in this column over here. And then we're going to compare that then to what our modern American government would look like. And we're going to look at some similarities, and we're also going to look at some differences. But I tell you what, let's start with similarities. The first thing that I want to bring up is in governments of the Middle Ages, like that established by William the Conqueror or Edward the Confessor, we see a strong central government, and that's something that we would see today as well. So that's certainly a similarity that exists between these two government situations. The other thing that we see in governments of the Middle Ages is that the government is going to control the military. Whether you're talking about the old feudal system where the kings would call upon these feudal lords to serve in battle, or later on where they're going to make an independent army of their own, that's still something that we would see today in a modern American government, right? Our government is going to control our military forces. Now, those are similarities. I want to talk about certainly some differences, though, that exist as well. And I want to start out with kind of a quote here, and we'll start off with the modern American government side. The quote says, "In America, it's your vote that counts. Whereas in the Middle Ages, it's your count that votes." Sort of a silly little phrase, but let's break it down and see what it is that it's talking about. Well, when we use the phrase, "it's your count that votes," count, that's just another word for baron or lord. So what we're saying is that the power is ultimately with the lords or the king here, as opposed to in America where we'd say, well, the power is ultimately with the electorate. And by electorate, we mean these are the voters. These are the people who are going to be making the decisions. That's a big difference that would occur between these two. Power in the lord or the king's hands versus power in the people's hands. Okay, flashback now. I want to go back now and we can talk a little bit about King John. Remember, we said, with our three kings going all the way back to William the Conqueror, we said in their hands we see more and more power consolidated in the hands of the king. We see a stronger and stronger central government. With King John, though, that's going to be a very different situation. King John was not a very good king. King John lied a lot. He threw people in jail if it suited him, even if there was kind of shady reasoning behind that. He also wasn't a very good military leader. He lost a lot of battles in France. Remember, William the Conqueror comes from Normandy. He had brought with him a great deal of French lands. King John is going to go a long way towards losing a lot of that land away. The other thing that King John does is he meddles in a lot of business. For example, he wanted to pick the next Archbishop of Canterbury. That's not how usually things had been done, but he didn't particularly like the person that the monks selected, so he picked his own, and he threw all the monks out. Well, the Pope gets word of this. He excommunicates King John, and eventually John has to back down, and he actually ends up becoming a vassal of the Pope as a result of this. This makes the lords furious. The other thing that he does that really makes the feudal lords of England mad is he continues to raise taxes even though it's not the tradition to do so. And so ultimately what they're going to do is they're going to present him with this document. And this document is called the Magna Carta. And what the Magna Carta does is it outlines what the specific roles and what the specific responsibilities and what the specific rights of individual citizens are. And the Magna Carta says even the king has to follow these rights. And there's a passage in the Magna Carta that says if the king doesn't follow these rights, if he doesn't allow people to have these different rights, then the nobles can actually come in and they can take away his power by force if necessary, claim all his castles. And so what King John is forced to do is acquiesce. He has to sign this document. One of the things that you may notice with some of the pictures that we're seeing here is that these nobles are all armed. If we look at them over here, they've come in full battle regalia. And the message that they're sending to King John is, look, if you don't sign this document, remember, we're still talking about feudalism here. You have given away your land to us because you need our loyalty. You need our military support. They say, if you don't honor these very basic rights, then you won't have our support. And so if somebody else wants to come in and they want to claim your throne, we're not going to be there to back you up. And so King John has to look at this document and say, well, I need the support. I'm basically being blackmailed into it. I don't like it, but there's not really anything that I can do with it. And so King John signs his name on this document, and thus we have the Magna Carta that is going to guarantee these basic rights to every individual citizen. Now, the reason that this is so important is certainly it's going to influence how history is going to unfold in England during the Middle Ages as a result of this. But the other thing is it's going to have a profound impact even today. Many of our important documents in American history have their roots in the Magna Carta. That's all for our Social Studies podcast today. I hope you've enjoyed it, and keep studying the social studies.